Is there anyone in this draft that really stands out to you?
So I guess the way we would look at that is there anybody that we think that is really high on our board that has a chance of falling? I guess like by definition you don't know who those guys are. But I think like you have an idea of like who maybe the industry could be uncertain about up top, and I think there's probably one or two of them this year. And in past years, maybe there's a little bit more, maybe like a handful of them. This year, just one or two. And so I think I don't think it's going to be a situation where after the first round, I'm talking to you guys and saying, well, this guy just like fell into our lap. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's probably less optimistic than years past that there's like that person who we have ranked really high on our board that's just going to like drop.
What position is getting more attention?
Internally, I mean, I think it's no secret that we've invested less in pitching in recent drafts, and so I think there's probably more scrutiny on that position than historically. I think in terms of like just position players, I remember last year it was like high school position players. I don't think we're seeing that this year. I think it's pretty scattered.
Have you guys made any adjustments? So you've talked about, Jed's talked about wanting more pitching in the system and not being happy where it is.
Yeah.
That can be at multiple levels. It's not just on average,
right,
of course. But have you guys made any adjustments to either the way you evaluate that challenge or how the model works with pitching?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, you can't take good pitching if you don't take pitching. So I think one of the things that we've looked at in years past, in the last few years in particular, is, well, how do we how do we allocate more of our draft pool to pitching without leaking sort of wins or like overall just draft value, which has always been like our North Star. We go into our draft being pretty agnostic of position player versus pitcher, just wanting to take the best player available, trying to, in the spirit of trying to just get the most wins out of the draft, future wins. And I think this year, the reality is we're going to try to probably be a little less just dogmatic about like maybe sticking to that and realizing that, practically to get more good pitching, we just might have to take more pitching. I think that's just the most obvious lever to pull. And then operationally, I think we've revisited the process, and Tyler Zombro and the pitching department have, I would say, will have their fingerprints all over this, and that's been a huge help to me, just from a process standpoint. And so I think that's another lever we've pulled. We've made some personnel changes within amateur. We have a new director of scouting operations, Kenton Emoto. So we've tried to just revisit things just across the board in terms of what can we do that maybe we weren't doing previously. But I think it honestly just for the most part comes down to investing more of our draft capital in pitching. And I think, Lance, you've put out some really good stuff that showed that look, our percent of spend based on pitching versus position player just really hasn't been that in at least the recent past. And and if you're going to accelerate, the amount of pitching that we have throughout the system, via the draft. I mean, that's just the most obvious place to start, is take more pitching, invest more in it.
Isn't some of this, Dan, possibly overkill for the fact that you guys take a guy like Horton? He's the right guy in college. He's the right guy here, and he just continues to get hurt.
Yeah.
So you're doing your job, but then all of a sudden there's a lot of other people brought in to make sure that the processes are correct, and the reality is they're human beings that get hurt.
Yeah, I mean, I think the injury component is obviously intertwined through all this, not just internally with the Cubs, but I think as an industry, as a draft strategy, and it's complicated. I think when you when Cade goes down, I still think we look at that as like from a draft standpoint, that was a successful draft pick, and but at the same time, I think what you'd like to have is maybe, then your next future Cade Horton, maybe healthy in the organization somewhere. And so I think that just the more that you can have, the better. I mean, the reality is, though, we've gone into the recent draft pools with a bottom third, pool. So it's like, if we increase the spending, it's not gonna, just all of a sudden, turn from where it is now to, a completely different spot. But I think you have to just know that injuries are a part of it, and that, that just speaks to probably having, more pitching to step up when there are injuries.
Volume is obviously one avenue to increase probability for success, but what are some of the attributes then within what you're seeking that you view as like, well, this is sticky, or this is a better indicator of, gives that pitcher the chance to be a successful pitcher?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've done a lot of work to try to figure out which pitchers are going to have the most success in our system. Everybody's development style and approach is somewhat unique. Ours is no different. And, I think when you look at those pitchers that thrive in our system, I think the underlying pillars end up, being velocity and being spin. I think those are two good places to start when you're talking about, okay, well, if we're going to increase volume, what do we want to see out of those pitchers? What are two just key attributes? Velocity and spin are probably foundational in that sense.
You talked about Zombro and the pitching department. That collaboration, is it just something that is kind of essential when you're drafting, making sure that player development, different departments have to be incorporated to really make sure everything works, right?
Right. I think in a modern draft environment, you need your pitching gurus side by side to help you, whether it's back in January to help you identify a pool of players that you're keen in on, whether it's in the months that follow to help you a sounding board for, what do we think we can optimize in this guy's pitch mix? What do we think we might be able to adjust or unlock? And then all the way leading up to the draft to help, really zero in on or focus in on the right pool of players. So I think it's been really helpful for us, for me personally, and Z and his crew are extremely knowledgeable and have I think brought something to our group, to our process, to our decision-making framework that is just going to be really key and really helpful.
Is it them looking at pitchers, or is it them giving you attributes of pitchers they think will be successful for you and having you go find them?
I don't know if I would characterize it as neatly as falling into one of those two buckets. I think it's more just been a constant dialogue, from November to now that, you get a group of guys that are really passionate, really knowledgeable about pitching, and then expose them to the scouting take, to the decision-making take, and you end up coming up with some really productive thinking and just some good ideas. And so I think it's just been more of like sharing of thoughts, collaboration, and then now I think you could characterize it as more neatly sort of fitting into some specific decision-making frameworks.
As far as looking at pitchers who've had Tommy John, it used to be 10, 12, 15 years ago, they'd say, well, we can't wait for the guy to get the Tommy John out of the way, because then we have a clear shot at the next 6 or 7 years with the guy. Has that changed dramatically, and do the medicals back up the idea that maybe this isn't really a workable idea any longer in baseball?
So I think the approaching pitching and approaching an investment in pitching without being cognizant of what the injury trends are wouldn't be a good idea, to your point. And so I think we have to be keenly aware of what the trends are on pitching attrition, on Tommy John surgery, on the how long it takes players to come back, and then there's the Tommy John. There's the bridge surgery too, which is a little different from straight UCL reconstruction, and so there's a lot of factors out there that I don't think we as an industry have a great handle on yet, frankly, and that makes it difficult, because I think if you're talking about increasing your investment in a pool of players where the incidence of injury is changing or not really well understood, that poses its own set of difficulties. But I think that's something that we're trying to study as best as we can, and I would not say or characterize it that we have as an industry have a great handle on that.
Is there a particular challenge this draft presents that's perhaps different from ones you've had with the Cubs in the past?
I think there's two things that stand out. One is up top. I'm not so sure if it's as strong as it has been in past years. Now, what could make up for that is the depth in later rounds, and I think that tends to happen when you have that feeling that up top it's not quite as strong. And then second, I think we've talked about NIL stuff before. Everybody's mentioned that as something that could be a factor. I think you're now just starting to see, maybe because colleges, the budgets for NILs have been expanding, I think you're now going to start to see that really compete with draft signing bonuses at a certain point. And that could happen this year. And what does that mean? Well, I think that could mean that as you get later on into the draft, your options, you're going to get players that have very good options to go back to school, and so it's going to be difficult for them to, if we only have X amount of dollars left in our pool, their best bet might be to go back to school in some cases. And I think this year, because of the budgets, the expanding budgets, and what appears to be expanding budgets with college NILs, I think we might see some downstream effects there.
You've seen last year, Josiah was an example. One of those players that you were able to kind of, and show you the high school revenues. Do you feel like that strategy of trying to save some of the pool might be effective, where you're maybe spending a little bit more on the front end to compensate that NIL effect?
I think you'll be in a much better spot, and it was part of our calculus last year too, but I think you'll be in a much better spot if you've banked surplus, or just if you've banked space in your cap as the draft goes on. If you play it straight, I think you'll have less options to try to convince a player to forego what he might have in the SEC, for example, to come into our system. So last year, when we banked money, in a sense to have enough to convince Josiah to sign, that's one example. But I think if you keep going on that and say, okay, well, the players that might sign for 300, 400, 500K, I think that's where you might start to see players weigh that college versus pro option. I think when Josiah, when it's $2 million, I don't think we'll have too much competition with colleges in that sense.
How validating has it been to see what Hartshorn has done in his pro debut just after you took that strategy to make sure that you were playing it?
I don't know if I've thought about it in a validation sense. I think it's exciting. It's super exciting. I mean, clearly we thought he was a premium talent and paying him $2 million. And I think for him to go out and do what he's done, could you ever expect that? And to be, one of the top prospects in baseball a year out and, hitting well in high A, that's not something, no matter how well you like a player, that you could ever predict or expect. So if you ask me, did I expect for him to be doing what he's doing. Did we expect that? No. But did we think he was going to go out and do well? Yeah.
When you talk about the levers that you can pull, and say one of them is just drafting more pitching, can you say that is a lever that you want that you're going to pull? Is that fair to characterize that's how you're looking at this draft?
To go into the draft and say we're going to do anything, I think I would stop short of that, because it's unpredictable, and some of it we can control, but then some of it we can't control. As far as what other teams are doing, what players are there. So I think I'd be reluctant to say we're going to do this going into the draft. But have we had extensive conversations about, given the opportunity, given the chance that it doesn't leak value to increase our volume of pitching? I think that'd be it's fair to say that that's a goal.
Do you feel there's possibility the whole system will be changed with this new CBA, and that everything might just get thrown out and start all over again when it comes to what you do?
I think it's fair to say that there's elements of the draft that, from what I read and from what I hear, sounds like are being negotiated. I don't know what exactly those elements are, and I don't exactly know what that means for the future of the draft. But I think if we're not keeping up with what's being public about negotiations there, and when they talk about the draft, I think we have our head in the sand, but I don't know where it's going to land.
In other words, I guess a better question would be, internally, have you guys discussed this to the point where you might have to be more careful with the capital that you have right now, because there might be very big changes in the way it's dispensed?
Yeah, I think talking about the CBA is something that I'm not going to go into, because it's not my area. And I think it's something that we need to just wait and see how that unfolds. But I can tell you, Bruce, we've internally talked about a lot of different scenarios for what could happen and then how we might respond to that.